Démosle la más cordial de las bienvenidas a la doctora Wendy Brown.
First of all, thank you very, very much to the organisers and the sponsors for inviting me to this conference. Okay, I came a long way, as you heard, from Australia. In case any of you don't know, it's actually in the middle of the world. Here, in the middle, at the bottom. It's the centre of the world. You're up here. And to get here, we had to come this way. So it was a long way, many hours flying. And in Australia, I come from a city called Brisbane, which is on the northeast coast here, about 1,000 kilometres north of Sydney. Today I'm going to answer 3 questions, or the talk will be in 3 sections. First of all, what are the health benefits of physical activity? And we heard a lot about them today already. And how much do we need to do? I'm going to have a look at measuring and understanding activity to see how much we do now, in Australia that is. And then talking about influencing activity and how do we get people to be more active. So making a start, what are the health benefits of physical activity? Well, you heard them this morning already. So I'm going to do these first slides really quickly because you know this stuff. So physical activity is the centre of my universe. It's right in the middle. As Dr. Matsuda said this morning, it's related to everything. Every cell, every tissue, every organ in the body. It has an effect. So up here in the red corner, we have things that eventually act on heart disease. So keeping the blood flowing freely to every part of the body, keeping the heart pumping efficiently and maintaining healthy blood pressure. In the blue corner, we have the musculoskeletal benefits, falls and fractures, everything to do with bones and muscles, which Sandra told us about, muscle atrophy, sarcopenia, osteoporosis, everything that keeps us standing upright. In the yellow corner, we have everything to do with the brain, the nervous system, all about mental health and cognition and neural transfers and happiness and stress. Physical activity affects all of those things. And down here in the green corner, everything we heard this morning about diabetes and cancer and fatty liver disease. So it really is very, very important, and all of you know that. But this is one that we're concentrating on a little bit more in this conference. And in Australia, we've had a campaign in Western Australia trying to teach people about something called grabbable gut. Now, I'm quite sure that none of you in the audience have a grabbable gut. When you're in private, you can try and see if you have. But if you do have a grabbable gut on the outside, it probably means there's toxic fat on the inside. So we're very interested in the relationships between physical activity and fat and obesity, and hence energy balance. So the weight benefits of physical activity are keeping us healthy body weight and maintaining energy balance. So what about obesity? How are we doing? Well, if this were the Olympic Games, where's Rona Applebaum in the audience? The Americans have the gold medal up there, but look, Mexico gets the silver, and who's right behind them? Australia and England. So these are rates of obesity from 1972 through to 2012, the most recent data. So I'm actually not sure why I'm here telling you what Australia's doing, because whatever they're doing, they're obviously not doing it very well, because things are not getting any better down there any more than they are up here in Mexico. What is the situation with overweight and obesity? We often hear that word pronounced as one word. I hear people talk about overweight and obesity as if it's one word. And I read something the other day that said 35% of children in the US were overweight and obese. And then people forget the overweight and say 35% are obese. That's not true. In Australia, these are data on overweight is the lighter colour. These are the boys, and these are the girls, the men and the women. And this is the percent of overweight and obesity. The light colour is overweight and the dark is obesity. So you can see here in the boys, 5 to 11 and 12 to 17, about 25% are overweight or obese. It's worse in the US, it's about 35%. But only a small proportion of that is obesity. Now, the reason those levels are low in Australia is because we've been working on this problem for about 20 years, and that hasn't changed. That level has been the same since 1995. We have great PE teachers, we have active kids, we have kids who play sport. And children, on the whole, are not really overweight and obese. But what happens when those children leave school? They become young men, and they get fatter and more obese. And then they become middle-aged men, and they become fatter and more obese again. And then 55 to 74. And here it looks like things improve, but that's actually because the most fat ones died already, as you heard from Sandra this morning. So if we have a look now at the girls, let's see if this can work. The girls down here, it's much the same. They're a little bit fatter in childhood, and then we've got this enormous increase through young adulthood and into middle age when women, as well as men, become more overweight and more obese. So I think if I had to sum up before I even start, I'd say we're doing a great job with the children. And you can do that too, because children are captive. They're in school for several hours a day. You have some control. But once they leave school, you lose control. And everything, as you can see, gets really quite out of control. And in the study that was mentioned in the introduction, we've been tracking the health of a lot of women in Australia now for 19 years. But between 1998 and 2012, these are data from women who were 21 years old in 1998. And they've been gaining weight like this until 2012. This is a separate group of women. They were 48 in 1996, so it's like as if these women are the mothers of these women. And they were less to begin with, but they're also gaining weight. And you can see that the rate of weight gain is twice as high in the younger generation. And we have another cohort, a younger one again, and they are also gaining weight at a very high rate. So we estimate that by the time these women are 48, they'll be 7 kilograms heavier than their mother's generation was. So each generation's adding 7 kilograms, which is about more than 2 BMI points. So it's really serious, and it's worse in men than women. So, conclusion, part 1. The health benefits of physical activity. Physical inactivity contributes to more chronic disease than anything else. It contributes to more chronic disease than smoking, alcohol, all of the other risk factors. If everyone would be more active, we would have less obesity, we'd have less chronic disease and illness, and importantly, we would have much, much lower healthcare costs. We would need fewer services, fewer hospitals, fewer doctors, if only we could get people to be more active. So how much do we need to do? We heard something about this morning. Bill said something about kilocalories, and his mother didn't understand, so he wanted to give her advice in minutes, and then we've heard about heart rates and heart rate max. What do we need to tell people to do? Well, if we summarise all the evidence on one slide, Dr. Cole this morning put up one slide with different health effects, but this one, imagine it's one slide showing the relative risk of any health problem. It decreases with increasing hours per week. The part where you move from doing no activity to doing some is pretty steep. There's a big reduction in risk. So it's a steep initial part here. There's no threshold, there's no magic figure when suddenly it becomes good for you. It's better all the way down. More is better. There's no obvious optimal amount here. and there's no upper threshold. So any amount is good. Anything better than nothing is good, and the more you do, the better it is. In Australia, we've just revised our physical activity guidelines. We had guidelines, I think, written in about 2003, and in the last 2 years, we just updated all the evidence to write new guidelines. Now, let's see if we can make this one work. The other guideline, the former guideline said we should be active on 30 minutes on most days of the week. 30 minutes, most days is 5, 30 times 5, 150 minutes, or 2.5 hours per week. This is the level that most guidelines around the world, that's what they say we should do. 30 minutes a day or 150 minutes a week. In Australia, we did something different this time. We stretched our guidelines. So our guideline now says you should do between 2.5 and 5 hours per week. These are guidelines for adults. This translates to between 30 minutes and 60 minutes per day. And for those of you who work in MET minutes, between 500 and 1,000, or if you work in kilocalories, between 650 and 1,300 kilocalories. But what we've done is try to stretch the target to tell people, well, actually, 30 minutes is really good, but we should, because of the weight gain problem, be trying to do 60 minutes a day. Now, you can imagine when these guidelines were announced, everybody said, that's crazy. You can't even get people to do 30 minutes. How can you possibly get people to do 60 minutes? Well, if you look at the original data from Paffenbarger's Harvard alumni study, this is a study of graduates from Harvard in the 1960s and 70s. Their curve of relative risk of heart attack against physical activity on this axis looked exactly the same. But in those days, so this is in the 1970s and 1980s, the levels of exercise being reported by Harvard graduates were up to 5,000 kilocalories per week. We never see that today. On our graphs, when we collect data, it kind of ends about here. So we think that by asking people to try to do between 30 and 60 minutes, it fits into this part of the curve just here, which really, compared with what people were doing in the 1970s and 1980s, is not very much. It's difficult in today's age because we spend so much time doing other things like sitting down, but it's not impossible to do an hour a day. You just have to be very clever about working out how. Now, we have rewritten the guidelines for children as well. So we have guidelines for adults aged 18 to 65. These are all available on the web. I'm not going to read them all, but basically the message is doing something's better than nothing. Be active on most days, so it's like medicine. You need to take it every day, take it regularly. Accumulate 150 to 300 minutes a week. If it's vigorous, it can be less time. There's a recommendation about muscle strengthening exercises, and down the bottom here, reducing the amount of time we spend sitting. And we'll come back to that in a minute. There are guidelines for 13 to 17-year-olds. I don't expect you to read them, but they say the same thing. They say 60 minutes a day. And there are also guidelines for 5 to 12-year-olds, and they say the same thing, 60 minutes per day. So, that's what we need to do. And what I've been doing for the last 5 years is trying to measure physical activity in populations to find out what we do. How much activity are we doing now? And the way we do this is working with accelerometers and inclinometers. Accelerometers are little gadgets that we usually strap to the waist. Many of you would have used them to find out how much people move each day. And inclinometers are little gadgets that attach to the thigh to tell us whether your thigh is horizontal or vertical. And we assume if it's horizontal, you're sitting, and if it's vertical, you're not. And the combination of these measures can tell us whether you're sitting, standing, or moving. We also have a device called a sitting pad, which is attached to office chairs, and it's simply a timer that tells us how long you've been sitting down. So when you sit on it, it times the time. When you get up, it stops timing. So what we've learned is a typical day for an Australian office worker looks like this. They spend 1/3 of the day sleeping. They spend another third of their day at work, roughly, and the final third is not at work. But the important thing is that of that time at work, more than 2/3 is spent sitting down. And the rest pretty much is light activity with only a little bit of moderate to vigorous activity in here. And the same is true at home. More than half our time at home or not at work is spent sitting, and the rest is just light activity. So that's about 2 METs, twice resting rate. Very low levels of activity right throughout the day. And this is really what's underpinning weight gain in the whole population. In our work with young adult women trying to figure out why are they gaining weight at a rate of 600 grams per year, we found there's 2 species of Australian women. There's one of us, when we go to talk to them, they say, "But I'm on my feet all day. I never sit down." Nurses, teachers, shopkeepers, hairdressers, cleaners, all those sorts of people who are on their feet all day. And then there's another group who say, "But I sit all day. I have to sit. I don't have any control. It's my job." And we figured, therefore, that maybe the ones who sit all day might be the ones who are getting fatter. But that's not actually what we found. And it's because the accelerometer data look something like this. This is from a person who says she's on her feet all day. She goes for a morning run. She's at work. She's a teacher. She's just walking around lightly, light activity, some sitting down through the day. And in the evening, she's at home putting the children to bed, getting their dinner, and then here she's sitting down watching television. If we look at a woman who says she sits all day, so she's in an office, her data look like this. She goes to the gym in the morning, so these are both very active women. She's at work, and you can see she's sitting in these periods, but there's lots of movement. And then she goes shopping, and then she plays volleyball, and then she does the housework, and she's not watching television at all. So what we've learnt from these studies is you cannot just focus on work or leisure. You have to really focus on the entire day to get a picture of where is the problem. And it's the same with men. Some men sit all day. Truck drivers, miners. Miners used to be the ones with the picks and shovels who actually did some work. Now they sit on machines, so they're sitting all day. There are a lot of men doing work where they're standing all day, construction jobs and gardening, things like that. And these are some pictures from a bus driver. I'm not sure if you can see them, but to show you again that you can't generalise, this is a bus driver who works in the morning here and in the afternoon. And you can see that he's sitting down at work. This is getting to work, getting from work. In between the shifts, he goes home and sits and watches television. And this is him back on the bus again, and he's sitting again in the afternoon. So he's very, very sedentary. But a friend of his, who does exactly the same job, has a trace which looks like this. So, I don't know if you can see this one, he's active on the way to work. During his driving, he keeps getting up and down to help people on the bus. In the lunch hour, he goes to the gym. He's up and down on the bus all afternoon, a bit of sitting here, and he's active at night. So we can't really generalise and say, just because you have a sitting job, it's an excuse not to be active. You can get up in most jobs, not all, but most jobs. And I just want to show you this one, because these are data from me. This is a trace from a thing called a polar loop, which I have on my wrist at the minute. And what it's showing us here is, this is night time, so this is asleep. The blue part is walking. The pale blue is walking. The grey is sitting. If I sit for more than 1 hour, this thing beeps at me. So on this particular day, July 24th, I sat for 2 hours, nearly 3 hours. This is me standing up. I then sat for 1, 2, 3, 4 more hours. I was working very hard. I then went for a walk, or a fast walk, came back and sat down for 2 more hours. This is a terrible day. This day equates to only 2 hours out of 2 hours and 53 minutes out of 24 was I moving. So I was stationary the rest of the time. I only did 6,000 steps that day, but down here in the small print, I did 42 minutes of moderate activity. So I met the guidelines. So here we have a bit of a conundrum. I met the physical activity guidelines, but I sat for more than 9 hours. Now, if we compare that with the following Saturday, you'll see the sleep pattern is much the same around this side, but this is me on my feet just doing housework kind of stuff most of the day. I think I might have gone to ride my bike in this period here, very short, probably up to the shop. There's only one period of long sitting time up here. So on this day, out of 24, I was moving for 7 hours. I did 12,000 steps, but I didn't meet the physical activity guidelines. Over there, I only did 18 minutes of physical activity. So it's a conundrum. We can have people sitting all day, meeting guidelines, or doing lots of activity and sitting the rest of the time. And the example I want to give to you is someone like a marathon runner who might go out and train for 2 hours in the morning and then sit for 10 hours. He gets the health benefits of physical activity, but he may get some ill effects from too much sitting. So if you're confused, it's because I want you to be confused, because it's complicated and you have to understand the patterns from the whole day to understand what's going to happen to people's health. And the sitting is important because these are data from 6 studies. You can see there, 595,000 people. It's a meta-analysis. And it shows that sitting time across the bottom, your relative risk of dying over various times in these different papers increases once you start to sit more than 7 or 8 hours a day. So that day when I was sitting for 9 hours is particularly bad. And if I had been sitting for 10, 11, 12 hours, it would get worse if I did it every day. And so we see these sorts of things coming across the internet telling us sit less to live long. And we've seen masses of this stuff come out over the last 2 years, that sitting is really bad. But what I'd like to ask you is, should we be focusing now on reducing sitting or increasing physical activity? And if I had to put money into this, I think I would have to say that sitting less is really important, because if you're sitting 9 or 10 hours a day, you want to get that back down here. But moving more is probably more important, because even if you have a job where you sit all day, you can still make time to be active. And if you move from doing no activity to doing some, you get enormous 50% reduction in risk of almost anything. And the more you move, the more benefit you get. So to get advantages from sitting, you've got to get your sitting right down here. But to get advantages from moving, you've just got to move at least a little bit. So if I had to choose, I'd say we mustn't forget to promote physical activity. If we can reduce sitting, that's great, but we mustn't forget the physical activity. So the third part is, how do we do that? How do we influence activity patterns to try to get people like me, who sometimes sit for 9 hours a day, to be more active? Well, the answer is, if it was easy, we would have done it by now. And I don't have any easy answers for you, but I know you're onto it. I know as a country, Mexico is developing a strategic plan to get people to be more active. But the important thing, I've said it twice, I think already, is that we have to think about all the domains of moving and sitting. So we need to think about transport. How do we get to work? How do children get to school? Can we build activity into our days through transport? I haven't seen a single person in Mexico on a bicycle. Where are the bicycles in this country? Are they like the ones that Bill was talking about in China? Are they all locked in the shed or rusted away? We can be active in transport if it's safe to do so. At work or at school, we have to think about increasing physical activity. We must think about leisure time, TV time, cutting TV time, screen time, try and cut it down, and passive leisure. We all spend time reading or knitting or sewing or doing things that are really quite low energy hobbies. And of course, increasing participation in active leisure and sport, and not just in children, but in adults as well. And we've got to think about all of those domains for each group of the population. We also need to think about something we in health behaviour studies call the social ecological models, which pretend that individuals live in environments which are composed both of social and cultural environments and physical and legislative environments. That is, physical environments like buildings and roads, and legislative like the laws under which we live. So starting in the bottom right-hand corner with the physical environment and urban design and facilities and climate and cost, all of those things that if they're not in place, it doesn't matter what we do, we can't be active. If you want to swim, you have to have a pool or a lake or a beach or an ocean, something to swim in. If you want to play tennis, you've got to have a tennis court. So you do need to have design elements. Australia has invested in this and produced a guide to healthy spaces and places, and this is for town planners to plan healthier towns, to make spaces for people to play and be active in parks and places to walk and safe places to ride bicycles. It takes a long time, but it needs to be part of the answer. We need to make our environments much more supportive, to make our choices easier. So lots of parks, green spaces, and signs and posters to remind people to be more active. I just put this one in because I love it, because I was lucky enough to go to Santiago de Chile this year, and to my amazement, on Sunday, there were no cars. Now, I understand this is common across Latin America and some parts of the US, that on Sundays, no cars, the roads are freed up for bicycles. Imagine if we could do that more often. Imagine if we could get more people onto bicycles, because there were lots of people in Santiago that day riding bikes. In Brisbane, we're building bikeways and busways to try and get people out of cars so that they can be more active. Footpaths are a bit of a dilemma. Sandra, this is one of yours from Sao Paulo, or part of Sao Paulo, on the right-hand side. Wonderful walkways, safe, you don't trip up. The other one is in Buenos Aires, where every 2 minutes you fall down a pothole. If you have pavements like the one, footpaths like the one on the left, people don't want to walk. So you've got to make the environment safe. You must get your environment right before you can get people to be active. In this bottom corner, the other corner, this one, the social and family support, sorry, that's moved, it should be on the left. It's more difficult, but it's about trying to get groups of people together and provide social support for activity. One of the successful projects we've been doing in Australia is called the walking school bus. And this idea is where the bus is actually the children and their mothers, usually mothers, sometimes fathers. So the bus, the driver is at the front, the conductor is at the back, and you go past the houses on the way to school, through here, and pick up the children. So the children walk to school with the mothers, and the mothers walk back, and in the afternoon the mothers walk to school and back. So the mothers actually get twice as much activity, but the kids get their activity at school as well. So walking school buses, good ideas. We also have a national kitchen garden program in primary schools, where the government has given money to primary schools to make a space to have the children have a vegetable garden. And the important thing here is that the children grow the vegetables, and then they're given time in the curriculum not for PE or sport, but for cooking, so they can learn to cook vegetables and eat them. They do have time for PE and sport as well, but this is for children, little children in years 3 to 6, and the government's providing money for establishing gardens and cooking lessons, which is another part of activity, because gardening is physical activity. We also have after-school communities which are funded again by the federal government, this time by the sports department, where money is given to schools to provide links with sporting organisations in communities after school. And so far it's not a big number by your standards, but in Australia it is 150,000 children enrolled in sports programs at school but after school. Social support for activity at work is sometimes more difficult. Sometimes we get in our offices and we're shut in and we don't kind of notice that people, oh, someone over there just saw the poor lonely person in the middle who got forgotten. We've been trying to address this with something in Queensland called the 10,000 Steps Project. This was started in 2003 and it's been continuing in various ways since then. But we introduced something called the 10,000 Steps Challenge, where people in big workplaces are given pedometers and they're put into teams, and the teams compete by filling in footsteps on this map, and the first team to get somewhere gets a prize. We've been doing this 10,000 Steps Challenge now with workers in the energy sector, with railways, telecoms, health, education, lots and lots of people all trying to strive for 10,000 steps per day. You do need pedometers that work, otherwise there's lots of cheating going on. But it's not always possible to be social at work. If you're a long-distance truck driver and you're driving from here to Texas, or from, in this case, Sydney to Darwin, it can be a very lonely life. And what we've been doing with the truck drivers in Queensland is a project called Shifting Gears, where the truck drivers are wearing a different kind of a wristband, a thing called a jawbone, which links to their iPhone, and they again are in teams, and they're challenging each other to try and be more active in the breaks. So when they stop their truck to get food, they try and build in some physical activity. They also take photographs of their food and send messages to the other truck drivers to tell them where the healthy food stops are. So it's a challenge again. They get points and they actually get rewards. And the idea is to make small changes. So instead of choosing fast food, they should choose a sandwich. Instead of choosing a full sugar drink, they should choose a reduced sugar drink or water. And every time they make these choices, it's registered on their phone because they take a picture, they get points and they get rewards. And you can't see it there, but it's basically money. So they get lots of points and then they get $20 or $40. So it's bribing people to change their behaviour. But truck drivers, that's a tough one, to get truck drivers to eat better and move more. But I think we are making some steps with that one. And then, of course, the last one, individuals. Changing what's inside people's heads, the way they think about physical activity, is really, really important. Knowledge, attitudes, intentions, barriers, motivation, enjoyment. It's often forgotten. We build the environment, we build the social support, and we forget to think about how people view physical activity. And our government decided that one of the most important places to start is to raise awareness of current levels. But funnily enough, they didn't decide to raise awareness of physical activity. They decided to raise awareness of waist size. Now, I think our presenter this morning talked a lot about waist circumference. And our government has been trying to get Australians to measure their waist and learn something about it. It's called the Measure Up campaign. And can we get this video to work, please?
You know how, settle down, put on a few kilos, but I'm not worried.
1 in 2 Australian adults is overweight.
Then you have kids. Life gets busier. You let yourself go a bit. I'm not worried.
Unhealthy eating and drinking and not enough physical activity can seriously affect your health.
Keep your dad.
For most people, waistlines of over 94 centimetres for men and 80 centimetres for women increase the risk of some cancers, heart disease and type 2 diabetes.
And when I first realised it was affecting my health, well, yeah, I got worried.
The more you gain, the more you have to lose. To find out how you measure up, go to australia.gov.au/measureup, authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Okay, so we have a nation which is now supposed to know its waist size. A lot of people have measured their waist size as a result of that campaign, but unfortunately they haven't done anything about it. So the government's second campaign in this series was called Swap It. And the idea is built on the small changes principle, where you make small changes in your life to try and improve physical activity and eating. So it's ideas like swapping sitting for moving and swapping often for sometimes, and I'll show you that in this next video. Thank you.
I've been losing my belly, but I haven't been losing all the things I love, because I've become a swapper. I've been swapping big, small, swapping sitting, and moving, swapping watching, playing, there you go Eric, and swapping often for sometimes. Once I got into it, I found it was easy.
To help lose centimetres without losing out, you don't have to stop it, just swap it. So start swapping today. For more tips, visit australia.gov.au/swap-it. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
So it's a whole series of adverts, and they all show that Eric, who's a big fat balloon man, is gradually getting smaller and smaller. I don't think Australians are getting smaller, but at least it's an attempt to get them to think about it. So what I want to kind of leave you with the idea is you have to focus on all of these things, on the individual constructs, on social and cultural environments, and on urban design and facilities. And just acting on one of those is not going to work, because these three circles intersect in the middle, and really trying to do one without the other is probably not going to be effective. So all of you who work in health need to work with the education sector and with the town planners, and it becomes an enormous task, but I think only if we get everyone talking to each other will we ever get any results. And this is what we did with our 10,000 Steps project. In using a town in northern Queensland as an example, it's called Rockhampton. We did a big media campaign, and then we tried to put the pieces together underneath, getting primary health care to talk to governments, to talk to schools and workplaces, and to talk to communities and sporting clubs, and get the whole community to think about being more active. And it didn't matter if it was sport or walking around the shopping centre or walking to work, just as long as everyone was getting 10,000 steps. And the children were really important, because the children encourage the adults to do it. So the schools are always a really good starting point. It's about raising awareness and motivation, setting goals, focusing on small changes, providing feedback so that people can see. So the best example I have is when I gave my mother a pedometer, and she said, "I'm sure I do 10,000 steps." And I said, "I'm sure you don't. Wear this." And I called her up and said, "How did you go?" And she said, "It's broken. I only did 2,000. It wasn't broken. She only did 2,000 steps. People really don't know how inactive they are until they wear these little gadgets to tell them, give them some feedback. So this was one successful project. And the great thing about it was that it was then translated in about 40 other towns and in about 200 workplaces. So it's easily copied. All the materials are on the website. And I even thought perhaps you could change Rockhampton to Mexico and have 10,000 Steps Mexico. It's not that hard. It just needs someone to coordinate it. So, in summary, what are the health benefits of physical activity, and how much do we need to do? Well, the health benefits are pure gold. They're the middle of this diagram. Physical activity is now, and has been, as long as I've been alive, the very best buy in public health. And the message is to do something every day and to aim now, in Australia at least, for 60 minutes a day at every age. Measuring and understanding, how much are we doing? It's complicated. Some people are active and sit a lot, some people don't sit and they're on their feet all day, but the message is we need to understand about how and why and where people move before we can influence, get them to move more and sit less. And the last one, how do we get them to be more active? I think I've given you some little snippets of ideas of things that can be done. I don't have all the answers. It's really difficult. We have managed to get smoking rates down to 13% in Australia. Compared with trying to change physical activity, that's been easy. But changing physical activity isn't easy, and it's going to take coordinated efforts from everybody. So I think using these kind of basic ideas, motivation and awareness, opportunities and access, vision and leadership for cultural change, which needs to come from all of you, and then evaluation against the targets that you set, it's really time to move. And one more thing. I want to share with you my favourite slide from my own work, from the longitudinal study of women's health. And it's one, I guess, that builds on some of the work that Dr. Matsuda talked about this morning. This is work published in the Bulletin of the World Health Organization, and it's about physical functioning in women. It's a fairly complicated graph, so I'm going to show you slowly. This is a measure of physical function, but it's a self-reported measure in this case, and this is age. And along here, I've put on a line which shows below the line is the time that you need help with everyday activities. So if you're a woman in our younger cohort between age 20 and 38, and you're in the lowest quintile, the lowest 20% of physical activity, your physical function declines in early adulthood, but not much. In middle age, from 45 up to 65, it starts to fall quite rapidly. In older women, age 70, they already need help. These are the women in the bottom quintile, the bottom 20% of function, of physical activity, and it goes down quickly. If we look now at the women in the top 20%, it's the dotted line, they have better function in young adulthood. It's also declining slightly, but the difference starts to show here. They're not declining as much in middle age. And by the time you get to old age, these women don't cross this line until 14 years later than the women in the lowest quintile. So these are the most active women on the top, and these are the least active women. And the difference in physical function between 70 and 84 is 14 years of extra healthy life. So it's not about longer life, it's about extra healthy life. And I think we can see from this that intervention in this period is going to be vital to try and push women onto this top line, and men, I think the data would be the same for men, to try and get extra healthy life, because it's not about living for 2 years longer, it's about living better. It's about physical activity from childhood all the way through adulthood and into old age. It's about the quality of life that we're going to have as we age. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.